Hi, I'm Frank Hermes, and I am the developer of the RockeTiltometer 3, or as we're calling it now, the RTOM 3. I'd like to give just a kind of an overview video of the operation and what you can expect to see when you use the RTOM 3. And if you're interested in this, if you haven't already seen it, you can go to our website at rocket-electronics.com. That's Rocket Electronics with a dash in the middle. You can see it up on the screen here. And we have some various things that talk about the RockeTiltometer 3, some of its development, how it came about. There's a little quickie on the operating modes, which are new and unique to the RTOM 3, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And then also there's a tab here for the store, so you could go out and buy an RTOM 3. And also, if you're just interested in getting some background on it, you can download the manual. If you buy the product, the manual will automatically come up as a download after the order processes, so you don't have to download it separately. But if you just want to take a look at what's going on with the RTOM 3 and how it works, the full operations manual is available in the store. So, this is the RTOM 3. It is quite a bit smaller and simplified in some senses and more extensive in others, and the price point is quite a bit lower. We got the pricing down to $69.50 compared to the over $250 when the RTOM 2 was first announced about 10 years ago. So this is a new version, takes advantage of some of the new electronics that are out there, and also over that 10-year period, Dr. William Primerlani has continued to develop the firmware that's the basis of the tilt engine, and now the motion, the motion detection that is included with the RTOM 3. So we'll get into this a little bit, and I'll try to show you how the RTOM 3 works and what you can expect. So this is the new RockeTiltometer 3, or RTOM 3, and we'll go over just kind of the operating modes and the options that you have while you are using the RTOM 3. This is how you'll receive it. If you ordered the optional data logger, the OpenLog data logger, when you ordered the RTOM 3, it will be included in the package. You can order that at any time. So if you ordered your RTOM 3 without the data logger, it's a simple matter of going back online and ordering it at any later date, and you can add it in. There is a data logger socket on the board that is soldered in and configured that way when you receive it. So in order to install the data logger, it's pretty simple. You just take the data logger and plug it into the receiving socket. The data logger SD card has already been formatted, and the proper configuration file to match the baud rate of the output of the RTOM 3 has already been placed on the card. So it should just fire up and work when you start up. Part of the bench testing process would be to go ahead and launch the tiltometer so it can go into its different modes. The standard launch will activate once you launch it. It's based upon the IMU getting the data that the rocket's launched. But if you want to bench test and be able to see the different modes, you can take any of the top header pins here. They're all four of them are ground. You can take any ground point on the system and tap it on this little solder pad that's located directly below the up arrow. You would just, in this case, take and put the header jumper on there. So you can just take and touch that other end of the header pin from going from ground to this manual launch point, and that will put it in to a mode where the RTOM3 thinks it's launched, and you can go through the other modes and do your ground testing. Configuring the RTOM3 for your particular project or flight is pretty straightforward. Everything's covered in detail in the manual. Talks about all of these things, but this is just to go over briefly what the process might be. The options configuration all takes place on these 4 header pins down here. The left 2 do the critical angle selection, which sets up your tilt angle and creates the tilt envelope that the RTOM2 will be using to base its tilt engine functions on. The right 2 header pins select the operating modes, of which there are 4. As far as the angle selection, is done with jumpers, and you are able to select from 4 angles: 10, 15, 20, or 30 degrees. And the chart on how to do that is in the manual. As far as the operating modes, the 4 are abort with motion monitoring. I'll get into that in a bit. Number 2 is abort. Number 3 is re-entry with motion monitoring. And 4 is re-entry without motion monitoring. So in order to select, let's just say that we wanted to select for 20 degrees. Included with the RTOM3 are some jumper that go on the header pins. There's 4 of them included, so you could fill out all the options together. But in this case, if we want 20 degrees, we would simply put a jumper on the leftmost pin. Also then, I will go ahead and create the operating mode by placing another jumper, and in this case, we'll go ahead and set it to just the standard abort mode, which means that at any time the rocket wanders outside of the selected angle, if that happens at any time during the flight, the ignition will be disabled, and that would be throughout the rest of the flight. So there's no coming back on that one. So to do a simple demonstration of a typical configuration and setup for the RTOM3, and I use this as on the bench test a lot. I've just got a battery on, bolted up to the RTOM3, and just a toggle or a push button toggling switch for power. So in this case, I have included jumpers on the left most header pair, which selects a 20-degree angle, and I have put a jumper on the leftmost of the option selections, which is pin 3, so that it will be working in the re-entry mode with motion detection. And I don't want to go into all the detail of what the various modes are now, other than to say that we're very pleased and happy to have made another innovation in the industry So briefly the modes that we have are abort, which would shut down ignition throughout the rest of flight, but we also now have included a re-entry mode, which if you go outside of the tilt envelope and re-enter, after a short delay, ignition will be re-enabled. And that's there primarily that there are certain flights where you get a kick off the rail or whatever, and in a abort mode, it might have put you outside of that tilt envelope, but then the rocket recovers and is actually flying pretty well. With the old RTOM 2, you would have been locked out, but with this, now we have re-entry mode, but we've also added a new feature that's unique in the industry at this point, and we call it motion monitoring. And what we're actually doing is detecting the rate of change of the orientation of the rocket. So we go through some calculations to calculate what the motion rate of change is going on, and if we pass a certain threshold, we will shut down ignition even if we're inside the tilt envelope. Maybe going with erratic flight that's even inside the tilt envelope, it would shut it down, or it also may be an indication of that the rocket's on the way out to go outside of the tilt envelope. So we're really pleased with motion monitoring, and we think that it will add a good feature to the use of the RTOM 3. I didn't put the data logger in there just so that you'd be sure and be able to see the LEDs. The logger will operate from launch through the next 120 seconds, and then it will shut down, just so it doesn't create too long of a data file for you. And there's examples of what data that you're actually will be recording in the manual. Okay, so what we normally will do here, so we're just going to show that we're going to apply power, and what you'll initially hear will be two long beeps that indicate that the angle selection is 20 degrees. This is so, again, that you make sure when you're powering up, and even when you're on the flight line, you've got a last chance to be sure that you have the thing configured in the mode that you would like it. So the first thing you'll hear is the two beeps indicating that we've set it at 20 degrees. And then after a short pause, you will hear three chirps, which means it's in operating mode 3, which is re-entry with motion monitoring. So we'll go ahead and power up. So I'm going to power off just a second. So when it first starts up, it actually makes a check in the system to make sure everything in the RTOM 3 is functioning correctly. And if it detects a problem on startup, you won't hear those tones that I just demonstrated, but you'll hear a series of steady beeps that will start immediately after startup and go until you power down. This will demonstrate the error warning tones that you would hear if you first power up and the system determines that it's got a problem. You'll hear those immediately after you first power up instead of the angle select tones or the heartbeat chirps that you would do if everything was okay. If this happens, you need to shut the system down and see if you can figure out what may be wrong. Okay, so you heard too long. That just is a one-time indication of the angle. After that, while the system is calibrating, you're just going to be hearing these mode chirps. It's just a heartbeat, just so that when you're out on the flight line and you're getting set up, got all your altimeters turning on and all that, it's just a reassurance that the RTOM 3 is still working correctly. One thing of note again is that if you're going to use motion monitoring, it's important to make sure that the vertical alignment of the board is as close as you can get it to the vertical alignment of your rocket on your E-base sled. The motion monitoring is going to be sensitive to that angle. The system should sit in its launch angle configuration for at least 5 minutes. It's just in pre-launch mode right now, and so you could have the RTOM3 down on the rail and it's still going to work like it's doing just fine. But after you raise the rocket and it gets into your launch position, you don't have to be pure vertical if you want to launch a rocket at an angle. As long as it's inside the tilt envelope, you can do that. But it should sit for about 5 minutes to let the gyros obtain the best, most accurate calibration for your flight. It'll improve the accuracy. So what I'm going to simulate now, and one other thing I'll just mention, so you can see the blue LED is toggling, it's following the ignition. So when the blue LED is on, it means ignition is enabled. If the blue LED goes off because you go outside the tilt envelope, that means ignition is disabled. The green LED above is basically a pilot light. It will go off after we do launch just to save battery power, or also built in is a 50-degree launch look. It's just again for your testing, just to make sure everything's working the way that it should. So anyway, we'll assume that we've been sitting out on the launch pad for at least 5 minutes, let the gyros calibrate. Now I'm just going to do a manual launch here just to simulate that we launch. Again, I'm taking the ground point, one of the top header pins, and touching to this point just below the up arrow, and that triggers manual launch. So now, since we're in the re-entry mode, if we go outside the tilt envelope, we disable ignition, but if the rocket should come back inside the tilt envelope after a short delay, the ignition will be re-enabled. And again, it's to catch those kickers and thumpers that happen occasionally. If you watch the blue LED right now, I'll demonstrate the motion monitoring. So if we get erratic inside and pass the motion detection threshold, which we've done there. So again, if it's nice easy motion that's going on, you know, the rocket's just kind of wandering around a little bit inside the tilt envelope, we're okay. But if it should start heading out very quickly, it will shut down, and now it's outside the tilt envelope. We bring back inside the tilt envelope, and after a short delay, we get ignition re-enabled. Again, if we're in there though and we're bouncing around and we just maybe got a coning rocket like you're seeing now, it just keeps the ignition disabled because of that motion. But once that settles down, if it settles down, then we'll go ahead and re-enable ignition. So that's kind of a quick overview of the operation of the RTOM3. We think the RTOM3 will be a boon to the market, and it should reach a lot more users than in the past because the pricing has gotten so much better, and we've added these features in that we think will help a lot of the Rocketeers out there. So we wish you the best of luck with your RTOM3. So that's a brief look at the new RTOM3. We hope you enjoy your experience with it, and we'd sure like to hear from you. There's a contact us button on the rocket-electronics.com website. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know how you're doing. Thank you.